They decided that they needed to send a few delegates from each of the 13 colonies to Philadelphia, not in 1774, not to separate, not to sign a Declaration of Independence, but to talk about the issues of their day, talk about these grievances, and to try and settle on a course of action. What could they do about this? This was the most powerful country on the face of the globe, Great Britain, and they had a standing army here because they won the French and Indian War. The French were gone, they were here with their standing army. They had ruled those colonies for 150 years. They ruled the seas. They're the most powerful government on earth. What could the founders do? What could the early Americans do about these grievances? So they went off to talk about it. We find ourselves in much the same situation now. 5 freedoms are guaranteed by the First Amendment. This is probably the most important sentence in the entire Constitution. The first 4 of those freedoms, worship, speech, press, and assembly, have been the subject matter of lots of lawsuits that have gone to the Supreme Court. So the full contours of the meaning of those first 4 freedoms is pretty well understood. We know what our rights are, we know what the government's obligations are. But the 5th of those 5 freedoms, the right to petition government for a redress of grievances, that right, the last 10 words, that the meaning of that guarantee, the meaning of that right, has never been declared by any court in our entire history. My version of the Declaration of Independence is 5 pages. 3 of those pages are devoted to a listing of the grievances that they had against the government of their day, and they set these out as the facts behind their justifying their decision to separate from that government. We have prepared petitions for redress of grievances having to do, the grievance in every case has been a violation of the Constitution. So we see, we observe, we scrutinize government's behavior. We compare its behavior with the requirements of our Constitution. And where we see an impropriety or a conflict, we unhesitatingly confront it, doing whatever is necessary to bring government back within the boundaries that we have drawn around its power. That's what we do. That's what the We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education does. We decided it was time to petition them for redress of grievances regarding the violation of the money clauses, talking there, of course, by the Federal Reserve System. Clearly unconstitutional, clearly a violation of the money clauses of the Constitution. We also decided to petition for redress of grievances regarding the government's violation of the privacy clause, the so-called privacy clauses of the Constitution. I'm talking there about the Patriot Act, which authorized, among other things, the government to come into your home, copy your hard drive, and leave without ever telling you they were there. And also, at the same time, another petition for redress of grievances regarding the imposition and enforcement of a direct, unapportioned tax on labor, a violation of the taxing clauses of the Constitution. I flew to San Francisco and got in a car with a few other people, and we drove to Washington. And a lot of other people joined us along the route, and so there were, I don't know, 1,000 people or so on the National Mall. And at 2 o'clock, we decided to part the crowd to allow the representatives from our Congress, from our members of the House and the Senate, the representatives that we had asked to come and at least let us know when they would respond to the petitions, to make room for them to approach the stage. And we did that, and of course, we had a live webcast. So this entire day's event was webcast, and thousands of people were watching it, and we parted, and nobody from the government came down to let us know. No one came down to provide any kind of a response. So isn't it absurd to dismiss a case for lack of standing if the underlying question is a constitutional question, and Mr. Berg is asking for the interpretation of the Natural Born Citizen Clause of the Constitution of the United States of America? Of course he's going to be impacted by the decision of the court, no matter how the court rules, up or down, in his favor or against him. He's going to live the rest of his life under that Constitution. And there are going to be future elections for president. Of course he's going to be impacted. How absurd to dismiss that case for lack of standing. Now I understand that, and as soon as I read that, I said, there's something seriously wrong here. I mean, maybe there's some truth to this. They just did this. They didn't even bother going to Congress. There's no authority in the Constitution for the government to give or lend public money or credit to any private entity for a decidedly or definitively private purpose. And so I'm reading about this agreement. Nobody's seen it, but it's reported on and the money has been transferred. But in that case, they didn't even bother going to Congress. They just did it. And so nobody was talking about their constitutional authority to do this, and I didn't want any of that money being transferred until the underlying constitutional question was settled. So we did the research with the assistance of a former director of research for the New York Federal Reserve, now in private practice, and we submitted a complaint in the federal court. We sued Mr. Bernanke and Mr. Paulson. Your rights and my rights are individual, unalienable rights, and they do not depend upon the will of any majority, whether that's a majority of the people voting in the polling places, or a majority of the people voting in the halls of Congress, or a majority of the people sitting on the bench of the Supreme Court. Our rights are individual rights endowed by the Creator. We have a right, an individual, unalienable right to a government that does not apply the armed forces of the United States in hostilities overseas without a declaration of war, regardless of what the rest of the people in society think about that. We have a right to a government that does not impose a direct unapportioned tax on our labor, regardless of what the rest of the people in our country feel about that. We have a right to a president who is a natural-born citizen, regardless of how the 65 million people who voted for Mr. Obama might feel about that, and so forth. And for the government to clamp down when the people are saying, look, this is the law. We're a nation under law. We're not a nation ruled by man or whim. The government is violating the supreme law of the land. We have this great American experiment. We have popular sovereignty here. Sovereignty rests with the people. The government is the servant. They're taking over the house. What do you do with servants that take over the house before you shoot them? You starve them. I mean, basically, that's what's happening, and the world will be watching this. So I can't imagine them clamping down. Sure, if it's just a few thousand people, they will. But it's 15 or 20 million people, which is not. When you think about, the millions of people who are disaffected, the people who voted for Ron Paul, the people in the Republican Party who have just seen their party, go astray, and many other people. I don't just mean pick one party over another. So I think we can easily reach, but it's going to depend upon you. It's going to rely upon your involvement and your passion to make this happen. It can happen, and the nice thing about it is, you have the legal authority to do this. And there it is.